Run this company, and the name tells you most of what we're about, but just to tell you a little more, focused on in Africa and particularly on battery metals, and particularly at the moment, cobalt in Congo. We've a number of assets in Congo, which I'll tell you about. I think we have a very strong board, which is fit for purpose. I'll go through that in some detail. I want to draw your attention to Medini, which is a private group that supports us, very strong technical focus, mining engineers, geologists, and process engineers. That very key point there. Congolese process engineer with over 150 years experience of operating in Africa. As I've mentioned already, and I'll show you a photo in a moment, Serge Ngandu runs our local company. He's Congolese, he's a metallurgist, and we're focused on sifting through assets in Congo, and have a number already. Our principal asset at the moment is Kasinka. I'll go into that in a bit more detail and tell you about where we are in terms of exploration, where it is. There are a number of producing copper cobalt mines near to our principal asset, Kasinka. There's been a lot of coverage in the press of issues around ethical mining in Congo, and we've all read about that, and I think it's very important to state, and it's genuinely held by everybody I work with, we will always operate and explore and ultimately hopefully mine to the highest ethical standards. And finally, just to remind you of where this company came from, it used to be called Sula Iron and Gold, and still has those assets, which are the Ferransola gold project in Sierra Leone, and I'll deal with that towards the end. So moving through, capitalized at around just over £3 million, broker and Nomad you see there, technical advisor Medini I've just talked about. All the board, the three members of the board are all significant shareholders, and we've paid for every share we have. We currently don't have an LTIP scheme, so that's equity that we've bought from our own pockets. We have two areas. I've told you about Blue Horizon in Sierra Leone, and I'll come on to talk about Congo in more detail as we go through. I'm a geologist originally. I spent the first 5-6 years of my career working in the bush in Africa in exploration, so I've been in the field and I understand what it's about. But I spent most of my career in the city. I ran sales at Canaccord. I've run other companies as well. So I've raised a lot of capital for a number of companies, and I thought towards the end of my career, as my hair got grey and my kids left home, that I would try and kind of put my money where my mouth is, and I bought equity in Sula, which is where that stake comes from. Matt Wood is our finance director. He's a career in the city. He's a former Nomad. He runs One Advisory, which provides outsourced legal, financial and company secretarial services to about 20 or 30 small AIM companies. I think it's a very cost-effective solution to having all those people on your payroll. And then thirdly, Ian McPherson is a mining engineer. He's a partner of mine at the private group Medini, of which I'm a shareholder as well. He has built a number of mines in Africa and elsewhere in the world. He was one of the guys sent by Gold Fields to commission and construct Tarkwa, which is one of the biggest mines in Ghana, and has run public companies. He was also the COO of Uramin, which was one of the spectacular successes in the uranium market. You may remember Areva buying Uramin for over $2 billion. So he has successes in his portfolio as well. Medini, I've talked a little bit about. The principal person to focus on here is this guy, Serge Ngandu, who is a full partner of Medini, but he's also the head of our local Congolese operation, ABM Cobalt, and that's really important to us. Serge is, as you can see, he's Congolese. He was born and grew up in Congo. He studied and taught at university in Congo, and he's run public companies as well. He was the COO of Nicanor, which you may remember was bought out by Glencore some years ago. And he's also been a partner at Worley Parsons and Hatch. So he has a strong technical background as a metallurgist, built process plants in Africa, and as well as being very well connected and very highly respected by the important people in Congo. So I think as navigating political risk in Africa is very important, and this guy, who's an equity investor through Medini into African battery metals, is very important in that regard. Why cobalt? Well, we've just heard from Kieran quite a lot about what's going on with battery metals. Cobalt is right at the center of it. 30 by 30 is the slogan, which I think encapsulates where legislation's going. Governments are targeting 30% electric vehicles by 2030. Whether that's achieved or not, that's the direction of travel. And just as an anecdote, the current Tesla battery uses about 23 kilos of cobalt. I've seen a better forecast since, but Roskill, who are one of the two respected independent consultants along with CRU, forecasting that demand for cobalt will almost treble over the next 10 years, which is 11% a year compound annual growth rate. I've seen more recently even higher numbers. So, but where we get to depends on penetration, and that's a matter of debate. But we're in a primary bull market. Let's settle for that. And I think in terms of cobalt exposure, there's a limited number of companies on AIM that provides that. I would say that in Canada and Australia, there's a plethora of cobalt exploration companies, and they seem to be focused everywhere in the world apart from Congo. And it just happens, as I'm about to tell you, that just about 2/3 of the world's cobalt comes from Congo. So I think they will struggle to meet the demand growth, and that has to come, in my view, from Congo. Just a little more on electric vehicles. You can see supply-demand, forecast, of demand growth. At the moment, electric vehicles are only 18% of cobalt demand, but you can see the forecasts. It's the orange bar is the principal one, which forecasts. This is Darton, who are another, I think, a very good cobalt supply-demand. You can buy their research for about $1,000 a year, I believe. This chart comes from them, and you can see on their forecasts the very strong growth. You can see the compound annual growth rates, which take their forecasts of just around 300,000 tonne a year market for cobalt by 2030. A bit later than Roskill have got 300,000 tonnes, but as I keep saying, the direction of travel driven by electric vehicles is pretty clear. And the consequence of that is, again, from Darton, supply-demand balance pointing towards significant supply deficits, the consequent impact on price, which we're already seeing, and I think most people will expect that direction of travel will continue. Congo. It's 2/3 of the world's supply, not the safest country in the world, as we all know. Ethical concerns about some of the smaller producers, child labour. But then on the other hand, Glencore, significant, world's largest listed producer of cobalt, and many other large Western companies. Until recently, Freeport was one of the second largest producer in Congo, but they sold their stake in Tenke Fungurume to a Chinese group, and China now dominates. Something like 80% of Congolese cobalt goes to China, and China Molybdenum bought out Tenke Fungurume and bought out Freeport's stake for, I think, around $6.5 billion. We'll always operate, and we always have operated at the highest ethical standards, and that will continue, so you won't see anything other than that from us. An important point to make, I think, is whilst Congo produces 2/3 of the world's cobalt, the second largest chunk is a byproduct from nickel, from Australia, from the Philippines, Cuba, Russia. Not on here is Canada, we're also a nickel producer, but none of those countries produce anything close to 10%. So the power of Congo in this market, has to be recognised, and that's where, in my view, the largest part of incremental supply will come from. And there are a lot of companies that are seeking to mine primary cobalt projects, and you see them in Europe and elsewhere. But what they don't tell you, and I think you should look, is that most of the cobalt, nearly every cobalt sulfide, is a cobalt arsenic sulfide. So there's going to be a lot of issues around permitting for arsenic, both in terms of water treatment as you produce a concentrate, and then ultimately in the smelting further on. Cobalt, all the ore in Congo is oxidized in heterogenite, so you don't have that arsenic problem. The DRC as a country is vast. It's as big as Western Europe. The copper belt down here right at the bottom borders Zambia. You can see the scale, 400 Ks. Everybody worries, and rightly so, about some of the issues around instability, warfare, and so on. And that's all up in this area, which is sort of from here to beyond. I haven't measured it, but from here to beyond Greece, probably as far as Ukraine. So it's a vast country. It's communication is poor. There's a big rainforest in here with, which we've all read about. So we are a long way from the problems, and Katanga is the most stable part of Congo. If you're going to be in the country, it's where you want to be, and that's where all the cobalt and copper is mined. Our strategy, we've been on the ground since January. We acquired our first license, Kasinka, as we focused the company, refinanced the company in December, and renamed it. So we've been on the ground on Kasinka. I'll talk a bit more about that. We have a second option on a license called Sakania, which was originally due to elapse in January. We've extended that because of the rains to April, and we'll make a decision on that in the next few weeks. I would say, however, that as we've been on the ground, we start to see more interesting opportunities which potentially are more attractive to us than Sakania, and I'll talk a bit more as we sift through those. It's possible that one of those makes the grade rather than Sakania itself. And that ability to sift through comes from our strong relationships in the country through, again, Serge and Gandu, but also because of some of the partners of Medini who have spent many years in the country. We're able, I believe, to sort out the wheat from the chaff in terms of the geological potential. But I think another thing which is very important is your counterparty, because you're farming in with another group and you need to make sure that that group is a quality group, and you don't want to be getting into bed, as it were, with somebody that you can't trust or has a tarnished reputation. Further out, and it's not for this year, and the name, African Battery Metals. So we're not exclusively forever cobalt. We are for now, but we will in time look at lithium, vanadium, graphite. We know Zimbabwe very well, and that's markets opening up, and other parts of Southern Africa. But that's for next year. We need to get a bit of critical mass where we are first, and we're an early stage explorer at the moment, as I say. Kasinka, it's about 50 square kilometers, 7 or 8 kilometers long, so it's a big license. It's underlain by the Rhone, which is what nearly all copper cobalt mineralization is hosted in. There are 7 large producing mines. I'm going to show you a chart in a moment, fairly close, within 25 Ks. We've started with an auger program. Our license is covered with soil. There's not a lot of rock sticking out the ground, so it makes exploration. You have to start with soil sampling, and we've started with augering, which is sort of like kind of drilling, but you're not drilling into the bedrock. You're just drilling into the soil and collecting soil samples and then sampling those. So we're trying to put together a picture from that, and we will communicate that as we go forward. And I would note that there is a land grab going on. There's a lot of people looking for licenses in Congo. The Chinese are very aggressive and buying both from artisanals, but putting together licenses for themselves as well. Here's Kasinka. Well, let me orientate you. There's Lubumbashi, the regional capital, couple of million people, big town, and we're about 35 Ks more or less due east. As I say, quite a long license, underlain by the Rhone. These purple circles are all the producing mines in the area. I'd note that quite a few of them have been subject to consolidation. Kinsevere used to be part of Anvil, which is now being consolidated, bought out by one of the metals trading companies, and Ruwashi and Etoile, formerly part of Metarex, which was a South African company which was also bought out. But the point is, we're in the right area for mineralization. A little more of a blow-up. Again, I'd highlight the length of the license, and this perhaps is the best one to focus on. A blow-up again. I mean, we started by putting an auger line across here, and then we've put a second line here. We announced recently to the market that we would extend that line, encouraged by some of the soil sampling we're doing. It's not high-grade mineralization, but we're not in rock, we're in soil, so we're looking at lower quantities of mineralization. But another takeaway is the length of this license. It's about 7 or 8 kilometers, so we've only started on the license. And we're aware that at this area up here, which is contiguous and on the same rocks, there is soil sampling program has identified copper cobalt mineralization, and we believe that will be followed up with drilling. So making the extension onto our license, we're earlier on in the piece, but we believe we're in the right area to find things. But I would also highlight asset diversity. We've heard the kind of the probability of any particular asset being successful is low, so you need to balance that with sifting through things. And we have one option at the moment, as I've talked to you about Sakania, but we are looking actively, and when I was in Congo 2 weeks ago, I visited another asset, and we are sifting through, trying to find other entrants which might make more value for shareholders. What we'd be looking for is either a low-cost farm-in where we could earn our way into the asset, or an extended period, maybe up to 120 days of due diligence where we'd get on the ground, get our geologists and do some work before deciding whether these assets are prospective enough for us to get involved. And part of the job of an early stage explorer like us is to sift through assets and find the right ones, and we're intent on that process. Just before I conclude, I'd remind you where this company came from and where we still have, I believe, value. Ferran Solar in Sierra Leone. We concluded late last year that the asset, whilst very prospective and in places very high-grade gold, is structurally really complicated, and we've concluded that it's beyond our financial wherewithal and probably our geological wherewithal, because it requires detailed kind of structural geological interpretation to take it forward. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have a value to somebody else. And we've signed 3 NDAs already. 2 of those NDAs are active discussions, and I'm hopeful that in due course we'll achieve some sort of farm out or a deal which would see somebody else taking it forward, which would, either through a sale or a farm out, would increase value to us from that project. So to wrap up, we changed the company at the end of the year. We had a new company with new assets and a new vision for this kind of new world of electric vehicles. I think we have very strong, deep technical and commercial relationships in the DRC. I keep banging on about Serge Gandu, but it is really important to have local people who are respected and make it easy for people like me to go into the country as he did, going in respected, I'm a friend of this guy. Those things are important, and we have those. We'll always, as I say, ethical standards are really important to us, philosophically, and one of the reasons I moved from broking into doing what I'm doing now is I'd like to try and make a difference. It's corny, but if we could get to a point of building something, we'd like to do that. We're mine builders as well as explorers. The backdrop couldn't be better. Electric vehicles, cobalt, it's where we'll stay, maybe move over time into other parts of the electric vehicles, battery metals, but that's our focus. And just to remind you, we have an asset in another country which we believe has a value, and we're working to try and unlock that value over time for all our shareholders, which, as I say, I'm one. So that's me. I'm the company.